So what we have now then is our logo, the date, a button for a potential login screen, and then we've got three columns which we've made three different colors called Build a PC, the options, and then the price. So now we start building what's in these separate columns here. So these are going to be the labels for the items. The options are going to be drop-down list and radio buttons that we can click to choose whether we want a certain type of processor or a certain type of graphics card. And then the price will be in this final column. And initially, these prices won't do anything, they won't add up, but we can make them work later on. So when we select the radio buttons or we choose from the drop-down list, the price automatically updates. So the first of the labels we need to put in is for the processor. So we just follow the same naming convention that we've done on all of our other labels so far, and we'll call it LBL underscore processor. Okay, so this is going to be a label, so it's going to be the same process that we always follow. So tk.label with a capital L, and then the first thing we always do is put it on the window. We want this this label to say what it is that we are describing. So that will just be processor. And I want to make the font the same as I've done the rest of them so that they look the same. So we could just make life a little bit easier for us and literally copy and just paste that in here. Don't forget we need two brackets. Okay, now the same as before, we now have to add that to the grid. So we want lbl.processor.grid. Okay, and then we need to decide what row and column we want this to be in. So it's going to be in the same column as in that first column where I had that thing across the top. So that's going to be column 0. And then the row, well, I want this in the second or first row. No, what do I'm going to work this out now. No, what this on the second row, because we've put the other things in the first row. We put the logo in row 0, so we want this to be row 2. And I'm going to put a little bit of pad around so that it looks much the same as it did, as the three labels that we put on. So I want X padding of just 1, because we didn't want that big gap, did we? And I want some pad Y on the other axes to be 5. So we've got a bit of a gap above and below. And the same as we've done, we're going to stick it to the left. So we want it to be sticky W. Okay, so we should now have a label showing up in that first column. So there it is. Okay, so it doesn't look too bad. Now we could bring it in a little bit from the side, but it doesn't look too bad. It doesn't look too close. But if you wanted to add a little bit more padding along the axes there, you could just push it in a little bit from the side. Okay, so that's the label then for the processor. Now we're going to give people an option to either pick one type of processor or another type of processor just by choosing that from a radio button. First thing we need to do though, so I'm just going to comment this to remind myself what it is I'm doing here. We need to define an integer for the storage of the number that the radio button will use to sort of work things out. So we can just simply call it var. Again, it doesn't really matter what you call it because it's just a variable and you're defining this yourself. And we want it, it's called tk.intvar, and you need to make sure you have a capital I and a capital V, and then you want to open and close brackets. So and all that does is defines a variable called var, which will store a whole number, okay, an integer variable, and that's all that is. So it's just any changing whole number. Now we define the code to actually build the radio buttons. Okay, so I'm going to call these radio buttons processor, just to remind myself later on, because I'm going to also create some radio buttons for the other options, and I want to be able to quickly look at it and see that actually this is the processor, and it's not the RAM or anything else. So we just want to basically do similar to what we've done before, like we've done with labels. We just need to define a radio button, and there is some code as part of the Kinter library for radio buttons. So I'm going to call mine, now they're called processors. So what we might want to do is define this, call it something like rad underscore proc or processor or something like that, so that we know what we're dealing with here. So it's a radio button. Okay, and it's tk dot radio button with a capital R, like that. Okay, now it works the same as all other things from the Kinter library. We then have to stick it on the window. We have to give it some text, and in this case I'm just going to give people two options at this point. If you want to add more radio buttons, you can, but I'm just going to give people the option to have maybe Core i5 and a Core i7. Now we have to tell it what the variable is to store the selection of the radio button. So it's going to literally be the variable that we defined earlier on, just a couple of lines above, that we called var. Okay, now it also needs a value, because it needs to know, what the radio button is actually, what it's worth. So when we press it, what's it worth? So when it's not pressed, it's worth nothing, but when it's pressed, it's worth 45, or however many pounds you want to make a Core i5 processor worth. So you might want to do a quick Google search, or any other search engine, and figure out what a Core i5 processor costs these days. So we want int because we want it to be an integer, a whole number. And I'm just going to stick with 45. £45 seems like about the right price for a Core i5. Might have come down now, but like I say, you can look that up yourself. So that defines a radio button. And then we go through the same process as we've done with all our other objects of putting it on the grid. Okay. So we just have to figure out now where we want it to go. Now, it's not going to go in column 0 because that's where we've put the label. So we want this to be in the next column along. So it's going to be column equals 1. And we want it in the same row as the processor label. So it's going to be row equals 2. And I can do what I did before with the other ones and, stick it to the left of the cell. Okay, so let's just run that and see if we have now a working radio button. Yes, we have there. Okay, so I can put a dot in that. It won't let me take the dot out because I don't have an alternative at the moment, but we can fix that just by adding another radio button. Now, what I might want to do, and you can do this if you like, is just increase the font size on this because it looks a little bit small, or you can leave it as is. It's up to you, okay? So now we go through that whole process again. So again, we can just copy this and we can just paste it for the second of our radio buttons. Now we can't give it the same name, so we're going to have to change this to something slightly different. Okay, and we don't want this one to be Core i5. We want this to be like a Core i7, for example, and we don't want it to be the same price as the other one because Core i7 is probably going to be a little bit more expensive, so I'll just make it 20 quid more expensive than the other one. And we don't want to put it in the same place as the other one because then it's going to look a bit weird. It's going to have one button on top of the other one. So column 1 is still okay, but we want it on the next row down. Okay, so now we've got Core i5, Core i7, 2 different prices. We're using the same variable to store the number, which is fine, and it just decided, that it's going to be on a different row because that makes sense. And then when we run it, you can see now we've got Core i5, and we can also choose Core i7. So we can jump between Core i5 and Core i7 now, so that we can see, if you want one processor over the other one, the radio button jumps between one and the other. Okay, so that's how you build radio buttons. We're going to do another one of those in a moment for the video card. But the last thing we need to do here is create the label for the price. Okay, so this is going to be the processor price. Okay, and it's just a standard label like we've done loads of times before. Okay, so we'll call it something like that, processor price. Okay, and that is going to be equal TK dot label because they've all been TK dot label. Okay, that goes on the window because they all go on the window. Okay, and what we need now then is we want the text to just be the number 0. So we just type 0. We don't need quotes because it's not text, it's a number. So we can just do text equals 0. Python knows it's a number and it makes the 0 red. Okay, and then the same deal here by using the relevant code to put the thing on the grid. Okay, now we want this to be in the last column. So we had 3 columns, so it's going to be column 2. And we want it in the same row as the radio button. So it can go on row 2 or it can go on row 3. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's going to be next to the radio button option. Okay, so I'm going to put it on the top one just to make it even with the top one. But if you want to choose row 3, that's also fine. Okay, so let's just run it. Yeah, there we go. So what will happen when we make this work is we'll click this here and it will put 45 or 65 in place of that 0 there. Now it's a little bit on the small side, so what we might want to do is just change the font by copying and pasting here so that we've got font size 14 because it's a little bit on the teeny weeny size. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Okay, and again, like I say, if you want to change the font on these, you can do, but you don't have to.